Hey everyone, welcome to the weekend edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me for this weekend broadcast, up first to my right, Alex Ooley. Alex is with the Forge of Freedom podcast. He is an attorney. He's in southern Indiana. However, I'm going to state right off the top, nothing we're about to say this weekend, he's our only attorney, and nothing we're going to say this weekend is legal advice. Below us, another person who's below Alex, somebody who's definitely not an attorney, is Tom Walls. Tom is the Firearms Academy of Seattle's senior trainer and all-around good guy. Tom is gracing us with his presence. Normally, he and Alex are my Friday guys. Alex does legal, Tom does training. Usually they don't come on the air together. Well, today's an exception. Up below me, and I'm honored to have this young lady with us, Rebecca Schmoe. Rebecca, if you've ever been on social media and heard of 1 Million Moms Against Gun Control, that's Rebecca. Also, she is the Kansas State House Representative for District 59. And before we get into the news, Rebecca, I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Ever since I've known you, you've been a gun rights activist, and you're one that got really perturbed, and you said, look, I can do better than the person that's representing me, and you went and got yourself elected to the Kansas House. First of all, what was the decision-making process for you to say, yes, I want to take on this responsibility? And then what was your journey like from the time you decided you wanted to do it until the time the returns came back?
Okay, so that was a very actually short amount of time comparatively to what most people do. This being a representative was never a goal. It's not a lifelong dream. It's just one of those things that's happened along the way, and I'm very thankful for it. So what happened was my representative, I didn't feel like he always represented me. He was pretty good on Second Amendment issues. There were other issues that we didn't always see eye to eye, but that's the nature of the game. And so I was comfortable in continuing to send him to represent our district until the day that he stood at the well as our Speaker Pro Tem and announced that he was retiring. He was not going to seek re-election. At which point I got a little nervous and started making phone calls and really trying to find out, okay, who's the guy? Who are we supporting? How can I help? And everyone that I spoke to said, we have no idea. We don't have a guy, so we don't know what we're doing. And so in conversations with that, eventually I was asked if I would be the guy. And so I went in and talked to my day job boss, because I work at a bank, and I said, okay, so this is the opportunity ahead of us. This is what it could look like, but since we've never done it, we don't really know. And he goes, wow, I'd sure hate to lose you. And then we laughed for a good long time, because in the state of Kansas, the representatives get paid $88.66 a day while you're in session. And the session lasts like 90 days. So it's not like a career choice, really. And so nobody's into this seeking to make money. And so I am, in effect, I am on loan from the bank. And so they are allowing me the time to go up for 3 months-ish out of the year and serve the state, and then come back and continue my banking career. So that's what that looked like. And the process was really just learning ropes. Since we had never run before and we didn't have an established core group that really knew what they were doing, I'm my own treasurer for the campaign. I was my own PR person for the campaign. I had a team that was assisting and helping, and then I had amazing support across the Second Amendment community. Everybody really pitched in and gave me personal recommendations or industry recommendations. Really did go a long way with my constituents, because we are really conservative in this part of Kansas. And really, we just navigated everything on a step-by-step basis. I had a primary, And so I won that at 62% of the vote.
Wow.
And then we went into the general, and I won that at 64%. So from there, it was just going to all of the trainings that they offer for all of what they call freshmen in the house and learning the process. Thankfully, I've been around the process and I know how to read bills from all of the years of advocacy. And so I walked in with less of a learning curve than a lot of my counterparts. But right now, it is just putting everything that we've learned over the years into practice and defending liberty.
If I could, I want to talk about one specific bill that we've covered here on the Bullet before, and I believe you got a hand in this somehow. There's a bill in front of the Kansas legislature right now. I believe it's passed the House, went on to the Senate, but it would require the Board of Education to come up with a curriculum for students in primary, in grade school and high school, to come up with a curriculum to teach children real gun safety. And from every media report I've ever read, including mainstream media for Kansas, they're going off that this is Eddie Eagle and we're indoctrinating kids into the NRA. What does the bill really do, and where is it at right now?
All right, that is House Bill 2304. I don't remember a whole lot of them by number, but that one I've got. We did debate this on the House floor just this last week for over an hour and a half. So if you can imagine someone like me who is all about firearms education and making sure that we are being safe and responsible gun owners, listening to an hour and a half of people complaining that we want to teach children the basic steps of keeping themselves safe in a situation where they find a firearm, it was infuriating. And so in order to keep yourself reserved and calm, it does take a lot of effort when it's something that you're passionate about. And what the bill actually does is it sets a standard. The school board, the state school board, gets to come in and determine if they want to use the free materials that could be provided or whether or not they want to tack on a cost to the taxpayer and use taxpayer funding to create a whole new curriculum. And the reason why they call it Eddie Eagle is because the NRA has actually stepped up and said, hey, if the tenets that you are trying to teach are stop, don't touch, run away, tell a grown-up, then we'll provide all the material for free. And so then all the cost would be roughly, I think it's less than $2,500, and that is just for one person to drive around the state and make sure everybody had the materials that they needed and were walked through the process of what, firearms safety education looks like. Aside from that, that's literally all the bill does is say, listen, you need to incorporate stop, don't touch, run away, tell a grown-up. Because we know that that's effective. It's as effective as stop, drop, and roll or say no to drugs. And so it's not mandating that the NRA be anywhere in the school system. The NRA just said, hey, if you use our already provided product, then we're not going to charge you for it. So the NRA literally has nothing to do with it except for they have coined those phrases, and that was it.
Very, very cool. We're starting to get comments come in here. I want to get one on the screen real quick, and then Worthwhile Fun says, Rebecca. I want to go ahead. We've already burned about 9 minutes. I want to we've got a lot of news to get to, and I do want to get to it. But I want to mention if we were talking about something you want to get a comment in on, like Worthwhile Fun did, if you comment on the live Facebook or YouTube page for Polite Society Podcast, I get those comments right away. I'll get them up and we'll talk about them. If you are watching us anywhere else on Rumble, on Getter, on Opslens, anywhere else, go to Twitter, tweet with the hashtag #TheBullet. Let me get.
And Paul, if it's okay for a second, I know we got some stories to get into, but I'd like to
Yep.
be kind of a cheerleader for a second, and just Rebecca, you and I only met just a little more than 10 minutes ago virtually, but thanks for being the guy, for stepping up to the plate. I want to encourage people not necessarily to run for office like Rebecca has, but don't just be the armchair quarterback. Get involved, and whether that means by advocating for legislation in the state house, or supporting your state gun rights organization, or an organization like the Second Amendment Foundation, step up to the plate. Be the guy or the gal that stands up for freedom. And if it's okay, Paul, I'd like to share this quote. I'm sure most of you know this, but maybe some of the listeners don't. It's one of my favorite quotes by Teddy Roosevelt. It's called "The Man in the Arena." It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So I appreciate you letting me share that, Paul. I just wanted to share that with the listeners, and thank Rebecca, and just sort of encourage our listeners and members of the Second Amendment Foundation. Don't be the armchair quarterback at home. Get involved. Stand up for freedom, because freedom dies with inaction.
It absolutely does. And I want to also, I guess, add some Susan and I, and Rebecca, Susan, you're both part of the DC Project. Susan and I have been talking recently. You have inspired me. My current House representative in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, sponsored a red flag law this year. I went and testified against it, and Susan and I have been discussing. We've got a little bit of time before I have to make a decision, but I'm thinking of making a run to try and unseat the House District 15 representative from Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
I will do whatever I can to help you with that mission.
It's where the election wouldn't be until 2024, and so I've got a little bit of time to stew on it yet, but I was extremely disappointed that my representative put that piece of stuff up. So it's a conversation Susan and I have had. We do need to get to news. First story I've got, we've been talking about this a little bit on the Bullet lately, and there was a merchant category code deployed by I want to say it's a Swiss agency, a non-governmental agency that controls merchant category codes for credit cards. And Amalgamated Bank out of New York has begged them to put forth a merchant category code for firearms. As recently as last week, Discover Card said they were going to start implementing it in April. And then that follows MasterCard and Visa saying they were going to do it, but didn't give a specific timeline. Well, it comes out this week. A Visa spokesperson shared a statement explaining the legislative efforts to prohibit or restrict the codes have led to significant confusion and legal uncertainty in the payments ecosystem, adding that the state actions disrupt the intent of global standards. MasterCard said that if some of the bills being advanced in the state legislature get passed, there would be inconsistency, which is why the company has put its plan on pause. A statement from Discover, which last week said they were going to do it starting in April, confirmed the company will not implement the code in April as it has had planned. The company says it made the decision to continue alignment and interoperability within the industry. And finally, American Express has also paused implementation of the code, according to multiple media reports. We dodged a bullet on this one, and it's because of people like Rebecca. People as specifically mentioned were Florida, Mississippi, Texas, and I believe it was South Carolina, where there were quickly going through the legislatures of those states laws that would make it illegal for merchant category codes to be transmitted to police and for the use of them even in some circumstances. I believe Florida, there was a $10,000 per occurrence fine for every time that information was tracked. Anybody want to jump on this one first? Again, for me, this is a victory.
My understanding in my reading of it is that the MCC wouldn't delineate exactly what was purchased. Does that sound correct?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So
just the amount.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gun guy. I want to go in and buy a 100-count bag of cleaning patches, and if that, and then they see, oh, this is a count of 100 of this thing. I've been tagged for 100 of something. They don't know what it is. Without that thing, if I want to get an extra screw to put my optic on my gun, and I get it from Brownells with a credit card, it on the face of it, when you think about what gun people normally do, and this is an excellent example of legislation, no offense, Rebecca, brought forth by people that don't know jack about squat. And I'm so glad that you stepped up in your state to do that. Fortunately, I live in a district it's very conservative here. We're an island of deep red in an ocean of blue in this half of the state. But people that don't know about guns, that don't understand what goes on, that think that why would you need more ammunition than your gun can hold at one time, that just don't get it because they didn't grow up or do the things that we did or do. That educational thing you just talked about is critical to that. We've got to raise that next generation so they know what's going on. I can't see anything useful out of this other than harassment and tagging. And harassment is the first thing that comes to mind.
Really, my thing about this whole situation is that we all know, both with working in the legislature and also just all the history that we know as people who are defending the Second Amendment, putting something on pause, halting something, doesn't mean it's going away. And so while it is a victory at this moment, we cannot lose sight of the fact that these folks will bring it back. They will repackage it, or they will very quietly slip it into their wording. This has served as a really good announcement that this is on the horizon. And so without states stepping up and taking action and making it illegal and wording it in such a way that they can't just change one or two small minor things on how they're implementing it, then we're going to be looking at this over and over. Nothing in legislature ever dies, and nothing in rights defense ever dies. We are constantly fighting the same battles.
What you just said about the wording, I think, is critical. Here in the state of Washington, not but a year or so ago, our legislature had a definition for assault weapon. They've taken that made-up, media-derived, scary term that everybody knows what an assault weapon is and defined it as basically anything that's a semi-automatic. And now we've got some legislation now to restrict assault weapons, which by definition previously snuck through, will mean pretty much anything you can think of, including a little 1022 plinker. So the definitions, I think as a legislator, that's something you can bring attention to and call them on their use of language.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot to add to this topic except to say to highlight that Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover are not the heroes here. They didn't decide that they were not going to implement these merchant category codes because they didn't agree with the category codes. It seems like they're simply not going to implement them because of the technical, the sort of the practicality of implementing these codes, where certain states are going to fine them or make it unlawful to use these category codes. So it's really just a matter of a practical decision that they decided not to implement these codes. So that's why the importance of state advocacy, just to emphasize your point, Rebecca, is so important, just to make sure that they don't come back with this and pass it in the future.
Absolutely. I want to get a comment in here. Worthwhile fun. Rebecca Schmoe is Representative Schmoe is my DC Project State Coordinator neighbor to me here in Missouri. She's setting the bar mighty high for the rest of us 2A activists. Amen. That is absolutely 100%.
I have on my teal today. I can't wear my teal for 2A DC Project shirt every day at the State House, obviously, but I did learn how to work some teal into the wardrobe while I'm up there.
I'm feeling bad because back that way a little bit, and I won't have time to get to it while I'm on air, but I do have a teal baseball cap that I occasionally wear on the air. I just grabbed this one at random. I didn't get the teal one.
I'm good with that one. That one's good.
I do want to move on to this next one. This next one I talked about a little bit earlier in the week. This makes my blood boil. I got this story off WISHTV.com. Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department has thousands of guns in its property room. Many of the guns have been connected to a crime. Some of them have not. However, the police department sends every single gun to the ballistic lab for testing. This data is sent to the Federal Bureau of BATFE for entry into a national database. I did some research this morning. I know that there was a federal law that banned gun registries on the federal level. And I believe, I have not been able to connect to the exact verbiage. I believe it was the 1986 Firearms Owners Protection Act, but I cannot chapter and verse it. The state, the people in charge of the Indianapolis PD, and the story says this has been going on for 30 plus years, the people in the Indianapolis PD who are doing this need to be brought up on federal charges and spend a long time at Club Fed. Now, admittedly, that's not state prison. They're very gentle with you at Club Fed, but they need to go away for a while. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, Paul, I think you're right that the Firearm Owners Protection Act is the provision or the law that prohibited a national gun registration, and that's under 18 U.S.C. 926. And the law says no such rule or regulation prescribed after the date of the enactment of FOPA, Firearms Owners Protection Act, may require that records required to be maintained under this chapter or any portion of the contents of such records be recorded at or transferred to a facility owned, managed, or controlled by the United States. And it goes on, but this is the language that prevents this national registration, that prohibits the national registration. And seems what's going on here in Indianapolis seems kind of like a backdoor registration to some degree, especially for the firearms that were not connected to any crime. They were seized without probable cause of a crime, and they're being fingerprinted basically by sending the data to the ATF. So I think that what's going on here in Indianapolis needs to stop. That obviously Indiana's a fairly gun-friendly state, but Indianapolis is one of those, as I think Tom put it earlier, an island of blue in a sea of red here in Indiana, just the reverse.
I can understand checking serial numbers. I served in law enforcement for a while as a reserve officer. And again, not being an attorney, but to me that's analogous to checking license plate numbers. But to go through an investigative process, a procedure deliberately done at a second facility to do a ballistic fingerprint, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And the story got its start from a gentleman that got his car towed. He apparently had parked illegally, got his car towed, and he immediately tried to get his firearm back. They got into his car, got his firearm, kept his firearm even after returning his car. Took him 2 years to get his firearm back, and then, oh, by the way, we sent the data from your firearm after test firing your firearm to the federal government. Wow, that's stepping above and beyond.
Yeah, one thing that I would encourage any taxpayer in Indiana to do is find out how much that's costing you in taxpayer money for them to be running this. Find that out, because that's a really good bargaining tool when you're trying to get people motivated, is how they're spending your money. And so check into that and see how much money that's costing for them to take your guns to the range and fire them all day and have a good time on your dime.
Follow the money.
Yes.
Yeah, and another issue too that is pointed out in the article, I was glad to see that they contacted Guy Relford, who's a well-known firearms attorney here in Indiana and firearms instructor. He just got a podcast and a radio show called The Gun Guy, and he's really good on Second Amendment issues. He says, there's other concerns here about whether or not the Fourth Amendment is implicated. Is this a search, especially with respect to firearms seized where there has been no crime committed? It seems like an unreasonable search in my mind, because as we all know, the Fourth Amendment prohibits the government from conducting unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant based on probable cause. And without a warrant based on probable cause, it sounds like there's a lot of these firearms that are being searched or scanned in a way without meeting that requirement.
Yeah, and gun websites chimed in that the Firearms Owner Protection Act of '86 is the one that prohibits a national registry of dealer records. I want to go ahead and jump. We're half done with the show, and we've got a lot of stories to go through, so I want to jump down to the next one here. And Alex, you and I talked about this one yesterday. Federal judge strikes down Missouri gun rights law. A federal judge has struck down Missouri's Second Amendment Protection Act, finding the law to be an impermissible nullification attempt that violates the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution. SAPA's practical effects are counterintuitive to its stated purpose, U.S. District Judge Brian Wimes wrote in a March 7th order. While purporting to protect citizens, SAPA exposes citizens to a greater harm by interfering with the federal government's ability to lawfully enforce enacted firearms regulations designed by Congress for the purpose of protecting citizens within the limits of the Constitution. And Alex and I discussed this one at length yesterday. I think what's going on here with the Missouri's law compared to several other states that have this is Missouri made it a crime for anybody to enforce federal law they thought was unconstitutional, including federal entities. That's my understanding, and that's what got this case struck down by this federal judge. There's going to be an appeal filed, and we'll see where that goes. Alex, you and I talked about it yesterday. Tom or Rebecca, do you want to chime in on this?
Kansas is actually looking right now at creating a very similar law. We've got something that protects firearms and accessories that are made in Kansas and bought in Kansas and kept in Kansas, but we do not have something that is the firewall between the federal government and our citizens. So we have been looking at wording on this, and we have been implementing our revisers, the lawyers that put together the actual bill wording. And so they've been looking at all the states that have done anything like this. And of course, Missouri's law took it just a little bit further. And so most of us who are interested in doing something like this, very much, we like the Missouri law. We are big fans of that. And so we're watching this to see, again, how it is that the wording comes into play. When a judge has an opinion and we all take it as that's the end of the game, that is really going against everything that the Constitution stands for. This judge's opinion is his opinion. And so with the appeal process, we will actually be able to get into what the wording is that they're saying is unconstitutional and how other states can go around that so that we can continue to protect our citizens and keep the federal government at bay when we need to keep them at bay. And it really is exciting to be able to watch this play out in real time and continue to support those in Missouri who are on the front lines of this fight.
I want to get a comment in here real fast. Worthwhile Fun, very active commenter. Thank you, by the way, Worthwhile Fun. Missouri expected this. Obama judge. Our AG is primed to appeal with eyes ultimately to SCOTUS. I'm hoping it gets all the way there. That would be a good thing.
I think we're going to see more of this. Analogous to this conversation is that we're also seeing at a more local level our county sheriffs are refusing to enforce some state law. We've seen, actual declarations published, even made national television. It's a healthy thing, I think, to make that question. It gives me a little hope for the politics in our country that maybe we're not going to be overrun by people with different views than us. Again, yeah, Rebecca just said it. It comes down to the wording of stuff. We've got to watch the wording.
Yeah, absolutely. Going on to our next story here real quick. Maryland's Senate gave preliminary appeal Thursday to a bill that would prohibit a person from knowingly carrying a firearm at more public places or onto someone else's property without the property owner's express permission. The bill was amended to remove a proposed prohibition on carrying a firearm within 100 feet of a wide range of public spaces. Maryland needs to pay attention to what's going on to the New York law that is being fought hard and will ultimately be struck down. New York did this, and unless you have specific permission from a landowner and that you cannot carry on that property. In New York states it as signage. It's in the middle of being fought about right now. Currently it's in front of the 2nd District Circuit Court of Appeals. But they're trying to pull New York when New York's has already been shot down in preliminary rulings, and New York just keeps kicking it higher. They're setting themselves up for failure there.
New York has a lot more money to fund it, to back all of this than Maryland does. So I don't understand why they're wasting their time and money doing this. But yeah, to each their own. Just keep up the good fight, guys.
They're spending that money. They'll be able to say, "But I did something, and the NRA blocked me."
You're absolutely right.
They're scoring points. Same thing with legislation we've got coming up here in our state. It's constitutionally a disaster. Even I can see that. But they'll be able to say, well, I did something. That you elected me to do something, and I did something, but then they can blame somebody else for not letting that go through. Unfortunately, we're going to be stuck with this law when it does pass the Senate, as I suspect it will. And all of us have to go through that waiting period of having, find somebody who's standing to have a test case, to go through the court, to be appealed, to go to another court. Eventually we'll be vindicated, but we're the ones that are going to have to bear the burden of that financially and in our chosen lifestyle. So, yeah, I'm getting cynical in my old age, can you tell?
Yeah, and this, we talked about this with respect to New York and New Jersey and now Maryland. And to your point, Tom, this is for political points. And unfortunately, they're political points that are being had at the expense of the taxpayers, because who's funding this litigation? Ultimately, it's the taxpayers of New York, New Jersey, and Maryland. So we're seeing political campaigns based on funded by taxpayer dollars.
It's exactly what it is. They've basically got deep pockets. It's like any government-funded thing is really a taxpayer-funded thing, and Our taxes are at the accountant now, and it's not looking like it's going to be a happy tax season. So I'm getting particular about where my money goes. I was in college back in the 70s. I started out as what we would consider an old school liberal, a Kennedy liberal. And then I started working and got my first paycheck, and I was very proud of my first paycheck until I saw the tax deductions, and then I became a conservative.
Yeah, when you look at your paycheck, and over a third of it goes to taxes, and that was my first paycheck, was a third of it went to taxes. Holy cow! You know? I've been... I consider that one of two things. I was a conservative until my middle 40s. And I was a conservative from the age of 18 for two reasons. One was my paycheck. Two was I discovered a guy on radio called Rush Limbaugh. And then I became a libertarian in my middle 40s because of a guy called Chaz Murray, who podcasted as the Unnamed Trucker, and who kind of just opened me up to logic. So I guess I always believed in libertarianism. I just never got the reasoning to click in my head until Chaz had a long talk with me.
For me, it was reading the books of Robert Heinlein.
There you go.
I burned through a lot of those.
Yeah, and Heinlein was an influence for when I named the show I do on Monday nights, Polite Society Podcast. Heinlein obviously was the inspiration behind changing it from, it was the Politics and Guns podcast to Polite Society Podcast. He was the inspiration, the quote from him. Do want to get to our next story, and this is good news. Now, is it going to go all the way through? I doubt it, but Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota has reintroduced the Travelers Gun Rights Act, a bill at expanding the rights of full-time travelers to own firearms. The bill seeks to update federal law to account for gun residency issues faced by individuals who live in recreational vehicles, people with multiple homes, military personnel, and spouses. Currently, the BATFE does not allow post office boxes or private mailboxes to be included on federal forms for firearms purchasers, which can create challenges for individuals with unique living situations. As a proponent of the Second Amendment, Rounds is committed to protecting gun rights of lawful gun owners. He believes that the Travelers Gun Rights Act will eliminate an unfair prohibition that Americans with unique living situations face when trying to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Rounds is not alone in his efforts, as Republican Representative Dusty Johnson of South Dakota has introduced a companion bill in the GOP-controlled House. Honestly, this is going to clear the House. This will clear the House of Representatives. Could it get through the Senate? Maybe in an omnibus bill. I don't expect it to go through in its present form in the Senate. I suppose anything's possible. Will Biden sign it? Unless it's part of the National Defense Authorization Act or something else like that, not in a million years. But remember, Obama administration gave us national park carry because it was part of an omnibus bill like that.
While I was reading that story, I actually started fashioning an email to my attorney general here in Kansas saying, "Hey, how do we become part of this? Let's go, come on!" And Chris Kobach is pretty hard conservative, and he's a gun guy, so I expect that he's going to take a good look at this and see how Kansas can join into effect to get something done on this, because we all know somebody who lives that kind of lifestyle. And after COVID, it seems like it's really starting to become a preferred lifestyle of a lot of people. So we have an opportunity here for everybody to be contacting their own representatives and their attorney generals and really get the ball rolling on this, because the more of us that do it, the better chance we have at getting this done.
Rebecca, those are key points. The more of us that do this, the more people that have firearms, it's now affecting them directly.
Yes.
When I was working hospitals, some of the doctors would be fairly progressive in their political views. But some of my friends that work with them in the surgical suites would say, you know, as soon as there's any kind of gun restriction, they decided, you know, I need to go buy an AR. The more of them that could become us when it comes personal. As far as people that we know, Paul knows who I'm talking about. Some friends that had lived in Alaska are now had refitted a boat and are now sailing the Gulf. Their residence at the moment is, you know, a hole in the water surrounded by fiberglass. During COVID, a friend of mine that sells RVs said that they couldn't keep them in stock. They couldn't make them fast enough. And I think that's a legitimate thing, but unless you know some people, that's kind of an esoteric thought. How can somebody not live in a house or an apartment or rent a home somewhere? That's out of the normal paradigm. For a lot of people that live in cities that tend to vote differently than we do. So it keeps coming back to education, you know, Alex and your legal stuff and you with your legislative stuff. We've got to educate the legislators. We've got to educate the guy on the street as to what we do.
There are several mobile home parks or motor home parks here in South Dakota that cater to these folks, and they will say, look, use this ad, you know, come stay with us, and for a certain amount of money, you can have your mail sent here. We'll forward it to you wherever you want it to go, but use this as your address, mostly for tax purposes, but I can also see that being a huge benefit for RV owners, for people who may buy a boat and decide I'm going to go on the sea for a while. That could be a huge benefit there as well.
It's a real common thing here in the Northwest to escape the rain and the snow, and people snowbird regularly. That's a common retirement strategy. Okay, I've retired. I'm going to buy a motorhome. You know, the husband and I are going to get down to Arizona and stay, you know, 4 or 6 months out of the year. Extremely common. So what is their permanent residence if they want to exercise their Second Amendment rights and have to fill out a 4473? Yeah, this could be useful.
Yeah, and I really like this legislation, and I like the quote from Brian Calabrese from the NRA ILA in the article. He says the Second Amendment rights of Americans should never be denied simply because some Americans choose to use a post office box address instead of a physical address. And I completely agree with that. I just hope that if this legislation doesn't pass, that this sort of legislation comes up again when the balance of power changes, hopefully at some point in the future, because I was being critical of liberals earlier, liberal politicians for utilizing taxpayer dollars to litigate cases, but I'll be somewhat critical of conservatives here because we've seen lots of great pro-gun legislation come up at a time when it has almost no chance of passing. Let's hope they have the same initiative to propose these bills again when the balance of power changes.
I want to go
Rebecca, you were talking about legislation being recycled session to session.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, Lazarus. It's nothing ever dies in the legislature. You just keep bringing it back and bringing it back until eventually you find a friendly crowd. So that's a very real thing. But in the meantime, the education piece is key. So while you're fashioning the bill and while you're out there talking about the bill, making sure that constituents especially know what the bill says so that they can effectively contact their representatives and start putting pressure on them, especially in an election year. That's very handy to get that education piece in right before you roll out the bill.
I want to go back about 6 years here real quick, and it's not just waiting for a friendly set of circumstances in Washington, D.C., where we've got the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's beyond that, because go back 6 years, we had just had President Trump sworn in. We had a Republican House. We had a Republican Senate. What did we get out of that? At that time, we had national reciprocity that was in the mix. We had the Hearing Protection Act that was in the mix, and we got nothing out of that. We need, and we kept hearing, well, it's going to happen, but this isn't the right time. We need to straighten out this. We need to straighten out that. We need to get on when we've got the correct lineup in Washington, D.C. We need to be getting on our legislators and saying, now is the time. That it doesn't matter what you think the priority is. My priority is this, therefore it should be yours.
Well,
Oh yeah, and I was just going to say, it's just numbers are key. And the more of us, the more voices that they're getting, the more inclined they are to move. Unfortunately, what we saw happen there has left a bad taste in the mouth of every gun owner, whether they are a Second Amendment advocate or not. All of us saw what happened, and unfortunately, that means that we sit around and we go, well, I mean, what's the point? And so we have to step up. We have to get past that little temper tantrum that we all can suffer from and actually get back in the fight.
Yeah, 100%.
Going where the numbers are, I like that. Well, their highline quote. Don't depend on a man's better nature. He may not have one. Appeal to his self-interest. Instead, it gives you more leverage. And I can see trying to be elected or reelected based on differing ideologies and have people like me or hate me for what I espouse as an ideology. If I talk numbers, everybody's got a household budget. They can all understand that. And generally, less expensive is better. So that's a solid strategy.
Absolutely. I want to jump down a little bit, and there's two more stories I want to get to. There are three in show notes. I'm going to go to the last two, but specifically right now, I'm going to jump to the very last one. Only one bill goes to governor's desk in Virginia this year. Believe it or not, that gun law does not suck. I got this off Richmond.com. Virginia lawmakers agree they want to reduce gun violence despite a divergence in schools of thought about how to get that done. Legislators reviewed a limited number of gun bills dealing with this year's legislative session. Most of them succumbed to partisan gridlock. The one bill, and I'm just going to drop the story there. The one bill that did get through is a tax rebate for someone who bought a securement for their firearm, something like a gun safe or a lockbox for beside the bed or something like that. They didn't get anything bad going through. And oh, by the way, if you're going to buy a safe, they might give you a $300 state tax rebate on that. That's good news out of Virginia right there. Youngkin only has one bill he can sign, and it's a good one.
Again, it comes down to the money, doesn't it? In my state, and I don't know the history of it, but for some time now, there is no sales tax. We have a state sales tax in Washington. There's no sales tax on the purchase of gun safes. So it's kind of incentivizing it. I like the same thing for training. I know our state is looking at requiring training to get a concealed handgun license. I hate the idea of making somebody pay money. It's like a poll tax for an enumerated constitutional right. Even though I'm in the business and I get money for training people, I don't want it to be required. But wouldn't it be wonderful if the state incentivized things instead of mandating things? You get a discount on a fee, you get a tax credit for doing something. It costs them very little to do that. A lot more encouraging than beating somebody with a stick.
Amen. Rebecca or Alex?
As far as that, the bill itself goes, I'd be interested to see what they define, what the actual definition that they use for the security device, the safe or whatever that is. And then I would be watching very closely. Not that it would come up for actual debate at any time, but I would be watching closely for that same language to be used in a safe storage bill that would impede on the individual's rights somewhere down the line. Because once they have defined what that safe storage looks like that they could incentivize, then it's very likely then those who want more regulation will use that definition later on down the road.
I hadn't thought of that. Good point.
Nor had I.
I think this is good news. I agree with you, Paul. I like any tax reduction in tax, even though this is a tax credit. I don't really like the idea of government trying to manipulate me or my actions by giving me my money back. But nevertheless, at least it's for something that I think encourages good behavior here. So I've got mixed feelings about it, but I think it is a win nonetheless.
absolutely. Last story we're going to get to, this off Gun Owners of America website. On March 9th, President Biden put forward his budget proposal for fiscal year 2024, which includes over $1.9 billion with a B for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. That's a 13.6% increase over the 2023 budget. ATF's budget to enforce constitutional gun laws was only $1.258 billion in fiscal year 2017 when Trump took office, and $1.4 billion in 2020 before Biden took office. That means that if Congress passes this budget, the ATF would have grown by 35.7% during the Biden presidency and 50.9% since the Obama administration. These funds and an expected ATF will. That sentence makes no sense. That last sentence makes no sense to me. So, Biden, big shock. He's using the ATF as a club to beat on gun owners with. He wants a bigger club. He wants more money for ATF. I'm hoping this doesn't get through the House.
Let me pose just a simple rhetorical question. For anybody that's worked for any kind of corporation that has departments with budgets, has any department ever failed to use all of their budget? If it was more than they needed or more than they planned originally, don't they tend to go, oh, well, we can do more, let's spend it all and expand? It's rare to see a government entity or any corporation entity, but particularly governments, to make their department smaller, to lessen their footprint. And we're giving them money to do that.
Yeah. Oh, and you're absolutely right.
It's infuriating that our money, while we're fighting the good fight, while we're involved, and all of us are, especially the four of us right here, we are actively trying to educate other people. While we're doing that, they're using our money to do things like this, to directly go against us. This is more than just he wants to make a bigger club. This is a slap in the face. This is know your role. That's exactly what this is. And whether he is competent enough to have formed this, or whether it is people working for him have formed this, that is exactly what it is. And it's news because they want to make sure that each and every one of us know that they are slapping us in the face.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of the saying that there's no such thing as a temporary government program. I think almost as rare is a shrinking government agency. They tend to expand and require or demand more money for their continued operation. And of course, primarily based on fear or promoting fear to the public.
Yeah, and of all agencies to grow, I would think ATF would be the least one that should argue. One could make the argument that maybe NASA's budget, although they are increasingly getting into left-leaning education with their budget, but and extreme environmentalism. But of any federal agency, the one I would complain the least about growing would be NASA, because they actually do get good science out of NASA from time to time. Other than that, the rest of it could pretty much go by about 95% down, and I wouldn't cry a bit.
No, I think if any of us were actually in a position to make it happen, we would just be eliminating alphabet soup agencies across the board, regardless of what it entails. We would just be cutting all of those programs.
Well, you hear it suggested that law should have a built-in, if not a sunset, at least a review periodically to see if they're still germane or if they need to be improved on after experience with them. There are agencies that would certainly be a good thing to do with. Yes, do that.
Exactly.
And Paul, I tend to agree with your statement. I think NASA causes very little harm, but I tend to think, as with most government agencies, that the money we spend on any government agency could be better spent in the hands of private companies or individuals. So I think the value proposition even for NASA is probably not there. So I would take it even a step further.
A wild
interestingly
idea.
enough, there's competition now with NASA, Elon Musk, and
Yes.
The Virgin Galactic kind of thing. There's some competition. I think that might be good for NASA. It might help them up their game if they have to. But if there's no competition, and NASA, at least NASA never shot anybody's dog.
Wild idea here.
Not that
And again, this is the libertarian in me, so this will never, ever, ever, ever happen. But on the bottom of your tax forms, list government agencies, and then your tax dollars. You number the boxes. This gets the first of my tax dollars. This gets the second if there's any left over. Just give the people the ability to fund the agencies, and I will just about guarantee. Number one, the IRS is gone overnight.
Yeah.
And I think a large amount of the government would disappear quickly, and I think the National Park Service, NASA, some of the things the government does do that isn't immediately harmful would grow.
Well, that would be voting with your tax dollars if
Yes.
that was something that ever happened. So, I can understand from a managerial point of view that you really need to have control of it. But if we had some way that tied into somebody getting voted for about which agencies we kept or what needed to be changed, and the ATF would be time for like 2 or 3 hours worth of your podcast.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour. I'm going to start with Alex, man. Tell us about Forge of Freedom and anything else you want to plug today, man.
Yeah, sure. So the Forge of Freedom is a podcast that I started at the beginning of this year. I'm an attorney. I'm a firearms instructor, but firearms aren't my only passion. My overarching passion is freedom, and that's why I started a podcast. I want to talk about not only firearms but other topics related to freedom, and I want to help encourage people to develop the personal responsibility, the knowledge, the skills that they need to live a freer life and to create a freer world. So if you're interested in the podcast, you can check it out on YouTube, Rumble, or any podcast streaming source. We've got, I think, 9 episodes out now. I release it weekly, typically on Sunday afternoon. So I'd appreciate it if everybody check it out and help spread the word of freedom.
All right, very cool. Tom, you're up. Anything coming at Firearms Academy Seattle that you want to let us know about, or anything else you want to plug, bud?
We have got our usual classes from introductory to advanced for all 3 systems: pistol, rifle, shotgun, legal stuff. We have Masad Ayub coming out for his fantastic mag. Thank you, Masad Ayub. In July, we have John Farnham coming out the last weekend in May. Firearmsacademy.com is the website in all our regular classes. If you're in the Northwest, you like to travel, come take a look.
All right, Rebecca, have you announced, or are you prepared to announce your re-election bid?
I am still deciding. We will see how the rest of this goes. No, our sessions here in Kansas for the House side are only 2 years, and so we're almost through with the first part of that, and so and I like it a whole lot more than I assumed I was going to. I got into this because I hate politicians, and I went and became a politician and surrounded myself with politicians. But the good news is that you do have opportunities to stand up for the people, and that's all I ever really wanted to do anyway. So we do have one gun thing that everybody on the outside of Kansas and everybody in Kansas should be watching for, and that is we are actively trying to get rid of the concealed carry fee that you pay to the state, because having to pay the state to exercise a right is always wrong. And so I'm actively involved in that one, so be watching for that one. We have high hopes that it will get through. And aside from that, follow me on 1 Million Moms Against Gun Control and follow along with the DC Project. Those are women from all over the nation, Paul, your wonderful wife, Susan included, that are making a difference where they are. They are actively doing something, and it's amazing to see these ladies stepping up to the challenge. And so with that, I just really appreciate you inviting me on. This has been great. It's been a long time since I've been able to talk guns and Second Amendment with good people, and so this is really, this feels like home.
Well, I'm going to say right now, you have an open invitation. Anytime you've got a Saturday available and you want to spend some time talking about gun politics or policy, anytime you want to, you're always welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take you up on this. I love this stuff.
All right. For me, that does wrap up my broadcasting week for the Second Amendment Foundation. Do please come join me next week, Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Central Time. And I can honestly say this because there's somebody here to agree with you, 5 p.m. Central Time, the only time zone that matters. We'll be doing the Bullet Monday through Friday. And next Saturday, let me get my schedule up. Next Saturday, I'm looking forward to again because I've got Greg Hopkins. He's the author of A Time to Kill. And Mike Piwowarski will be here, a third commentator that I have not yet booked, but we'll get a third one in here. We'll be talking about the events of the week next week as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for commenting, everybody, and we will see you